Hi, and welcome to this presentation that is the third in a series that looks at grief and loss. My name is Cindy Rowe, and I'm an MSW student at Marywood University's School of Social Work, and this lecture is going to cover grief and bereavement in childhood and adolescence. Since the death of one's parent or sibling can have lasting effects on a child, we'll be looking at grief primarily in these contexts and how it impacts children and adolescents at the different stages of their development, along with some appropriate interventions for each stage. So there are four interrelated concepts within the overall concept of death that a person must be able to understand in order to fully grasp the meaning of death. The first is the fact that death is something that happens to all living beings. Secondly, death is final. When somebody dies, they cannot return. Also, being dead means that all physical functions of the body cease, and when they cease, a person dies. Lastly, for an individual to develop a full and mature concept of death also involves their coming to the realization that they also will eventually die. As we'll see, a child's comprehension of this death is directly tied to their stages of development. While the development of children ages like 2 to 4 focuses primarily on their learning to talk and communicate with others and their first expressions of individuality, cognitive development regarding their ability to comprehend things is much slower. Since their interactions with the outside world is limited to basically their parents, their siblings, and other close family members, these caregivers in turn help mold the child's initial sense of morals, their concept of right and wrong, and they do this by modeling and reinforcing socially appropriate behavior. These areas of growth, though, still leave the child with the inability to express more complicated abstract things, such as their emotions. So this, coupled with their self-centered view of the world, typically leads children in this age group to engage in magical thinking. And this in turn leaves them thinking that other people just automatically know what they're feeling, and it inhibits their ability to grasp the first two concepts of a mature outlook on death, which is universality and irreversibility. In regards to their thought processes regarding death and grief, some early research that was done in the 1940s by Anthony and Nagy found that children in this age group, between like ages 3 to about 4 or 5, they view death as meaning that the deceased person is just less alive. So young children can't comprehend that even though grandma died, they don't get that she won't ever be coming back. Their inability to express themselves verbally leads to their reliance on their behaviors as a way to communicate such difficult things. So they may show this in the terms of increased anxiety, sleep disturbances, and somatic symptoms like stomach aches or headaches. While children in middle childhood still lacked abstract thinking capabilities, they do advance in concrete operations, and this allows them to consider multiple characteristics of objects and people. This awareness is reflected in their emerging ability to understand that death is universal to all living things, that it's irreversible, and that those who die basically cease to function. This relates to the aspect of cognition known as transitivity, which is the ability to use logic to think backwards and forwards in time so that they're able to follow a chain of events. So in considering the death of somebody, they understand that grandma died because her heart stopped working and that she's permanently dead. Because they may still lack the ability to express the intense emotions that death triggers, they may exhibit heightened separation anxiety, particularly in the wake of the death of a parent, as they might feel that the surviving parent will also die. So these feelings can manifest themselves as hypervigilance in their need to know exactly where their surviving parent is at all times, and it can push them to want to be as close to them as possible all the time, especially at night. So the child may act out if the surviving parent denies their insistence that they sleep with them. Because children in this stage of development are also eager to prove that they can do more things on their own, they take great pride in their accomplishments. Yet, underlying anxiety about the potential for failure and their inability to measure up and be accepted by their peers drives the need in children of this age group for recognition and reassurance. Therefore, the death of a parent for these children is a particularly hard blow for them to handle, since their parents are a primary source of validation and support for their self-esteem. Children in late childhood, from around ages 8 or 9 until the onset of puberty, they're gaining a greater mastery of concrete operations, while friendships and peers take on greater significance in their life. Their understanding of cause and effect impacts their ability to cope with stress, and that they can accurately assess the aspects of a stressful situation and the degree of control that they have over it. This helps them to be better equipped to regulate and express their emotions. In terms of the grieving process and the emotions surrounding the death of a loved one, in contrast to younger children, children in this age group are more prone to oscillate between expressing their emotions and engaging in activities of life that represent a sense of normalcy to them, as seen in the dual process model that we looked at in the last session. Because their strong sensitivity to belonging and fitting in with peers is so great, the child who lost a parent to death can perceive their loss as a major factor that makes them feel like they're very different from others their age, which can leave them feeling alone and isolated. So these children can have problems socially and academically. So what exactly do children need? A key point that I want to make here is that, especially for those who've lost a parent or sibling, the most important factor in a child's ability to successfully grieve their loss is the ability of the surviving parent to do the same. Key findings from the research indicate that children whose surviving parent or primary caregiver is completely overwhelmed by their own grief, they showed marked increases in anxiety, depression, sleep disturbances, and health problems. According to the Harvard Child Bereavement Study, children need to know first and foremost that they will be taken care of. This includes that caregivers ensure the continuity and consistency in all aspects of daily life for the kids. Kids also need clear, age-appropriate information and trusted sources to listen to them, to show them support and respect for their feelings, and to answer their questions. They also need to feel included and that they're valued members of the family, as well as they need ways to remember and honor their loved one. So family members are the first line of providing interventions for children. Again, like we just said, kids will need a lot of reassurance that their feelings are normal and that they will be taken care of. Providing them with honest, factual, and age-appropriate communication about the death itself, what will happen at the funeral, and in their family moving forward is going to help. That's all going to help children cope better. Giving them the choice to participate in the family rituals as appropriate for their age also gives the children the chance to celebrate the life and memory of their loved one. And it helps with their processing of task one, coming to terms with the reality of their loss. So things like that can involve having them help pick out photos of the loved one for display at the funeral. They could draw a picture or a card to leave in the casket or at the gravesite, or they can light a candle next to pictures of the deceased. Together as a family, families can also plant a tree together in memory of the person who died. Or they can release a helium balloon, like a prayer balloon, so they can send their prayers and their thoughts up to their loved one. Also, another key point, having a trusted adult available at the funeral to explain to children what is happening and what they're supposed to do is also very helpful. Regarding professional interventions for grieving children, the first step, of course, is conducting a thorough assessment of the child's personal factors, factors related to the death, the spiritual and cultural beliefs and practices of the family, and their overall functioning and support systems. As this information will allow the practitioner to create a service plan that's going to address the specific needs of that child and of the family. Other professional interventions might include a combination of bereavement and support groups, therapies that incorporate play, art, and music, as well as family and individual therapies. Because teens' developmental tasks focus on the creation of their personal identity, they gravitate even more away from the family as friends take on even greater importance in their life. Cognitively, their ability to think abstractly, coupled with their budding sense of identity, brings them to a mature comprehension of death, as they finally integrate the realization that someday they're going to die with the knowledge of death that they've already had, that of the universality of death, non-functionality, and the finality and irreversibility of death. Grieving a death for teens can be difficult due to conflict between their drive for autonomy, which drives them away from their parents, and their need to still have them as a source of comfort and security, and the knowledge that comes from that comfort and security that they can check in for reassurance from their parents from time to time as they need. For teens whose parents die, they suddenly find themselves without this key person in their life who represented that emotional security. So it can be very hard to distinguish what aspects of a teen's grief are actual grief responses and which ones are derived from the normal trajectory of their development. Grief for adolescents commonly alters between periods of emotional distress and the desire for normalcy, again, as explained in the dual process model. Because teens are so consumed with the perception of others and their desire to conform, they tend to think that no one else will understand their grief. Consequently, they may try to suppress their feelings because they fear being perceived as weird or emotionally out of control by other people, and especially their peers. Thus, their grief can present itself as confusion, loneliness, feelings of emptiness, changes in sleeping and eating, and feelings of exhaustion, while for some other kids, they may become emotionally withdrawn, show aggression, use drugs and alcohol, or have thoughts of suicide. As for children, support for from other family members is the first line of interventions for grieving teens. Their participation in funeral ritual arrangements can help them work through the task of coming to terms with the reality of the loss, like we just mentioned, and can take the form of them creating artwork or a playlist of songs to play at the service, as well as participating in other family rituals that honor their loved one. From a professional standpoint, assessment, again, is the first step of clinical interventions for adolescents, and it's going to look at the individual's cognitive, emotional, and behavioral capacities and challenges, aspects of the death itself, and the functioning and supports of the family. Schools can be a resource for bereavement support by providing individual counseling to students, peer groups that foster acceptance, and provide a place where teens can get support as well as be supportive of others who are going through the same thing, and by providing education to raise awareness of such issues as teen suicide, drug and alcohol use, and stress reduction. Other group supports can involve crafting art, music, and performance pieces, as well as sports activities and retreats. And lastly, individual and family sessions with a clinician can also help teens who are struggling with grief. So this concludes this presentation on grief in childhood and adolescence. And if you're interested in learning more about death and bereavement, check back on my YouTube channel for other videos on other topics related to death and grief. So thanks again for watching.